Hey everybody, I'm making this video to give you a little bit further clarification on your lab reports so that you can rewrite them and hopefully improve them. So I'm going to go through each of the sections and just respond to a few of the things that I saw for a lot of the reports that you guys handed in. So for the first part, the readability and mechanics, what I highly encourage you to do is to have someone proofread your paper. A lot of times the first draft of your paper isn't really polished, so have someone proofreading it and reading it for clarity really helps, and that should improve your score if you even just have one or two people look it over to help you find any typos or any sentences that don't make sense. Another good resource for you is the Writing Center on campus. You should be able to use that to help you improve the clarity of your writing. Second, the introduction and background. So a lot of people did fairly well on this, but I want to remind you that the purpose of this section is to introduce the reader to the experiment and give the reader some background on why the experiment's important. So what is the importance of phytoplankton in the ocean? Why aren't there always phytoplankton in the ocean? What are some of the limiting factors? So those are some of the big things you need to address there. Also, making sure that you have a clear scientific purpose and hypothesis for the experiment. So that's the other part that most people got, but a few of you probably misunderstood. So make sure you write that very clearly as to what your experiment was and anticipated hypothesis. The third part, a lot of people in the methods section did not describe in detail enough the actual process. A lot of people just took the directions that were written on the handout. Well, what you need to do is to write exactly what you and your group did, because not everyone added 25 or 30 grams of salt to their sample to make seawater. A lot of people added less. Some people maybe even added more. So make sure that you write down exactly what you did, because if you have to repeat the experiment, I may only give you just those directions. The other thing that people forgot was to include the general methods or processes used to collect the ocean tracks data. So make sure you include a paragraph about that. The next section is the results section. I hope the directions were clear there in terms of including all your data. Make sure your data tables are very clear, easy to read. Make sure that they do not span 2 pages, that the entire data table appears on 1 page. So the purpose of the data table is so that someone can look at all the data very quickly and be able to interpret them, or at least know what happened in the experiment. You don't want to have to keep turning pages, or some of you didn't even include the initial data, so there's nothing to compare to. You only included the end data that you collected. And so that is the data table, and then you'll also describe in a couple paragraphs what happened in the experiment. So the final section is the conclusion and discussion section. That is where you needed to interpret the data. That is, what did the experiment tell you about your variable? Was it important? Was it not important? Were there unexpected things that happened? This is where you need to also circle back to your hypothesis. Did this agree with your original hypothesis? And then finally, you also need to include an additional experiment. Where would you take the experiment next? What questions would you ask for a future experiment? Or what would you change about the experiment if it didn't come out as you anticipated? The final thing that really most of you did not include, but I mentioned it and it's also included in the rubric, is a detailed explanation of the ocean tracks data. So you want to include at the very least the data from inside the hotspot as a table. You can include that at the end of the discussion section or within the other results. But the part here is to include that because you have chlorophyll data and you did measure chlorophyll in this experiment. So the question really is, what are the tuna doing in relation to areas of high or low chlorophyll based on the data that you collected? Are they in a hotspot with high chlorophyll, or are they swimming outside the hotspot with high chlorophyll? Well, that's up for you to tell the reader so that you have an idea of what where tuna are aggregating or congregating during long periods of time during their hotspot. So make sure that you have a clear explanation of that. You might also want to include the other data that you collected, such as swim speed and depth and sea surface temperature. So that's the whole point of that, and that's how you're tying it into the actual the phytoplankton experiment. So what significance do those two hold together? All right, so if you have any further questions or need further clarification on anything, please feel free to email